Welcome back. Now that we know what variables are and how to create them, let's talk about the rules of naming your variables effectively. In Python, we have few basic rules for naming variables. One of the rules is that your variable must start with a letter or an underscore. Variables cannot start with a number. Variables can only contain number, but they cannot start with a number. For example, let's say we have a variable by first name. So we are going to say first name. So let's say first name is, let's say John. So as you can see, we have a squiggly line here, which is indicating that we have an error. So you can see a red squiggly line under S here. If you run this now, then you are going to see invalid decimal literal. So this is telling you that a variable cannot start with a number. Your variable can contain a number, just like in our last lesson where we have num1, num2, but the number must not be the one that will be starting the variable. So in cases like this, for example, where we want to write first name, so we can just say first, we write it in letters. Okay, so take note of that. Your variable can either start with a letter or an underscore, but it can never start with a number. So we can also print this. So let's print underscore first name. Right, so you can see that underscore first name is John. And if we also get rid of the underscore, so if we run that again, we're going to have first name to be John. Another rule for naming variables is that variables can only contain letters, numbers, and underscore. Special characters are not allowed in naming variables. Special characters like @ hashtag, exclamation mark, all those special characters, they are not allowed in naming variable. For example, if you say @first name, this is not allowed in naming your variables. You can say you can say hashtag first name. No? So that one is turning the line to a comment. We get to comments in our later lessons. So special characters are not allowed when naming your variables. Another thing which we've mentioned in our last lesson is that variables are case sensitive. First name with lowercase is different from first name with uppercase. Take note of that. We've mentioned that already. All right, now let's move to naming conventions. Talking about naming conventions, we have few conventional naming styles for variables. Let's look at some popular ones. In Python, the most widely used naming convention is called snake case. This means words are all lowercase and they are separated by underscores when you need to write a variable name with more than a word. So all the letters are written in lowercase separated by underscore. For example, just like we have here, first name, this is a typical example of snake case. You can also have another variable, let's call it total amount. So we have total as the first word separated by an underscore, and then we have amount. All right. So we can say total amount is, let's say, 30 or 39. So this is a typical example of snake case. Alternatively, there is also camel case, where you capitalize each new word. For example, if you want to turn this to camel case, we are going to write it like this. So we are going to have first name. So this is camel case. So we can say first name is also John. So let's identify this. This is I can say this is snake case, and then this is camel case. Camel case. All right. So with camel case, you capitalize each new word. The first word is lowercase, but subsequent words, you are capitalizing them instead of using underscore. This is more common in some other languages like JavaScript. There is also Pascal case, where we capitalize each new word, including the first word. So after camel case, we also have a Pascal case. Let's call this Pascal. Okay, so with Pascal case, you capitalize each new word, including the first word. All right, so we can say first, name is, okay, let's say Toyosi. That's my first name. All right. We also use this Pascal case paralleling in Python when we are dealing with classes. We still get into classes when we are dealing with object-oriented programming. So the most widely used of these naming conventions in Python is the snake case. This is the most widely used naming conventions in Python, and that is what we'll be using mostly in the course of the bootcamp. Every other ones are also permissible. They are allowed, but the most widely used is the snake case, which we'll be using and you'll be seeing mostly in most of the Python code bases you'll be seeing around. Before we wrap up, let's talk about a few best practices for working with variables. One of the best practices is that you should choose descriptive names whenever you are defining your variables. Instead of generic names like X or Y, pick names that describe the data you are storing in that variable. For example, let's say you want to store username or password. So rather than just saying possibly X is equal to John, so probably John is your username, and you are saying Y is the password. So let's say password. So rather than using generic names like this, it is better to use descriptive names, names that describe the value you are storing in that variable. So rather than using X, you can say username is equal to John. Then you can say password. So rather than using Y, you can say password. All right. Then another best practice is that you should avoid using Python reserved words. Python has some reserved words. One of them that we've come across is the print function. You know, we have the print keyword. Whenever I want to print anything, let's say we want to print a username now. So these keywords, we have many of them like that in Python. So you should avoid using these Python reserved keywords for naming your variables. If you use any of these reserved keywords for naming your variables, whenever you need any of those reserved functions, you will not be able to access them. For example, if we use print as a name of a variable now, let's say we assign a name to print. Let's say print now is James. Now we've turned print to a variable. So if we try to print any other thing later in our code, let's say we want to print our username. So what we are going to run into will be a type error because print has been changed from a function to a variable. So we will not be able to access print keyword. This is one of the reasons in our last lesson when we used sum. I say sum is equal to num1 plus num2, and that gave us a yellow squiggly lines that is telling us that sum is a reserved keyword. So sum is also another reserved keyword in Python for a function that sum numbers together. There are other reserved words like this. We'll be getting to know them in the course of the bootcamp. As we go along, we'll be getting to know more reserved keywords. So you avoid using these reserved keywords whenever you are naming your variable. All right. Another thing is you should be consistent with your naming style. If you want to use snake case, use snake case all through. If you want to use camel case, use camel case. If you want to use Pascal case, use Pascal case. Be consistent with your naming style. And you should avoid overusing abbreviations in your code. For example, here that we have username, you might want to write it like this. You might want to say user is USR. You should avoid overusing abbreviations. Just write your variable name clearly so that whenever you are working on that code base later or someone else is reading through your code, it will be clear and descriptive. All right, that's that for variables. In the next lesson, we start exploring data types so you can see what kind of data we can store in a variable. See you in the next lesson.